All right, thanks very much, everybody. My name is Richard Warp. I am CTO of Pollen Music Group and also the artistic director and technical director for Brainstorms, which we're going to be talking about this afternoon. I first want to thank IEN for the opportunity to come and speak today. Last year, I came for the first time to IEN, and I thought it was fantastic, so it's just great to be actually up here and speaking today. So, I'm going to introduce you. You're going to introduce yourself. Okay. Cool.
Hi, I'm Erica Warp. I'm a neuroscientist and also the director of data and science for the Brainstorms project. Thank you all for coming. And for those in the back, if you want to come forward, please do. We're not going to bite you, but you're also happy to find a sit there. So go for it.
All right. We just got a lot of small text, a lot of detail. So sorry about that. So we're going to talk about a show that we debuted in June at Frameless in London, which is a multi-gallery immersive venue. And this was effectively a complete takeover of that venue for 4 weekends in June. And the sort of overarching theme of this was to create a show that would visualize the brain's response to music. And so this is sort of the core concept of Brainstorms. And this was a joint venture between my company, Pollen Music Group, and Gala Wright, who's the daughter of Rick Wright, the late Rick Wright from Pink Floyd. The initial meeting where this all kind of came together was very happenstantial. We just kind of met at a Christmas party and started talking about areas of common interest, and it just turned out that our areas of common interest were music and neuroscience, and so this was very exciting to us. And so we started to talk about ways that we could work together to, in the first place, sort of celebrate her dad's legacy, and also celebrate the 50th anniversary of Dark Side of the Moon, which was last year. And so started working on lots of different kinds of concepts, demos, prototypes, did a demo at Outernet, created all kinds of strange and wonderful, proto experiences. And then after a lot of working on this, probably for about 1.5 years, actually, we landed on the concept of recording brain data from a lot of people and then visualizing that in a sort of immersive experience, immersive way. Pollen Music Group doesn't have a history of working with large-scale immersive events. We've never done this before. We are very well versed in music and sound for VR and XR. We were the de facto audio department for Google Spotlight Stories. And we've done a lot of kind of work in this area, but not live sort of room-scale, multi-wall projection. So it's very terra nova for us, but no less exciting. I'm just going to give you a quick overview of that.
It's really, this project is combining all my personal areas of interest. I mean, it intersects science, music, and art, and it kind of encapsulates all of the things I'm really fascinated in.
It was sensational. It was just really incredible to be able to experience the sound in this brand new way and have everything visualized, and to know all the brain data, 120 people that produce the visuals from their brains. It was incredible.
It's lovely. I study neuroscience, so it's amazing to see how they bring art and science together?
I think it's insane. I'm still finding it hard to comprehend how they've managed to turn these kind of brain waves into an actual like visual experience. But it's fascinating and it's beautiful and it's just beyond impressive.
You can find some more information at those locations there. That didn't last very long. Sorry about that. Okay, so the main challenge that we had here was when we initially came to Frameless, we had the idea of creating just a single experience out of the collected brain data that we did at Dolby in October of 125 people listening to Great Gig in the Sky, and present that in one of the rooms at the venue. And that sort of quickly turned into, can you take over the entire venue and create content for all 5 galleries? And we were kind of like, sure, sounds great. And then we just kind of went away and you know, took a deep breath and then got to work. And that was in February this year, and we launched in June. So the entire timeline for creating all of that content, plus a live brain data capture event in that venue was 4 months, and we had a team of 10 people. And
Richard has more gray hairs now.
Yeah, that's nothing to do with the brain, you know, brain sensing or anything. But yes, and budget, we're not going to even talk about the budget. And so, you know, there were a lot of wins here. There were a lot of firsts, we felt, things that hadn't really been done before. We recorded over 300 people in a sort of high-touch VIP brain data capture experience using high-resolution EEG. While they're listening to Dark Side of the Moon in these lovely, beautifully designed pods by Gala Wright herself in a sort of live lab kind of space that was streaming the brain data into a multi-wall gallery with a 15-minute delay so people could get their brain data captured, grab a drink, and go and, you know, catch up with their brains in another gallery. And then all of the experiences were these variations on a theme of great gigs in the sky, because that was a sort of central theme. So another gallery had a collaboration that we did with Imogen Heap, which was, the output of which was starling murmurations. So we had Imogen and her daughter come in, get their brain data read, and then we converted that into starling murmuration activity using a measure of musical enjoyment as the driving force behind the visuals of the starlings. We created an eclipse, which was the visuals for the sun were sort of powered by the composers of the soundtrack for that gallery and the raw brain emanations that they had from the sort of raw EEG. So it was a, you know, super exciting series of immersive experiences. And also, and I think this was the big one, certainly for Pollen, was that we were given exclusive access to be able to remix Great Gig in the Sky from the original masters from 1973 from the band. So, you know, there's only 4 or 5 other people who have been able to do that, and we were able to remix it for that space in sort of 32 speaker multi-channel configuration. So it was super, you know, super exciting, not for me because I didn't do it, but for my colleague. So I'm going to just kind of turn it over now to I think. Oh, no, I've got just a couple more here. So just to sort of, I think I already talked about this, but these are a few images of, you know, the galleries themselves. So as you can see, the scale of the gallery is pretty, you know, pretty huge. And what we really wanted to get across was, yes, you've got the audio and the visual, and that's beautiful, but then you've got this additional layer of the brain data that is used to drive all of these visuals. Yeah, and what was really important to us from a creative standpoint was that this wasn't just screensaver, it wasn't just wallpaper. The metrics needed to map in a kind of relevant way to things that we understand and things that are sort of meaningful to us. So also that the data should follow a contour, a narrative arc. So for example, with the Aurora Borealis, if there is, you know, excitement at the peak of the Great Gig in the Sky song, you know, then maybe that is visualized in a very clear way. So it's like, oh, the Borealis is turning red. everybody's very excited about this particular moment in the piece where Claire Torrey is screaming, which is very exciting. And the other part to it is really important for us was that the experience should be enjoyed. It should be enjoyable even if you don't understand what the data is doing. That you should be able to enjoy it just on its own merits. So now I will turn over to the sort of the architect of the neuroscience side of the experience, Erica. Yeah.
Yeah, so let's talk about brains some more. So how do we collect this brain data that we keep talking about? So we used EEG, which is electroencephalography. This is one of the devices that we used. EEG captures the electrical activity of your brain using sensors on the scalp. We used a 14-channel device called Epoch, which is made by Emotive. And it really strikes a good balance for this particular project between getting really good high-quality data and being relatively easy to put on and use. And I say that kind of relatively. These are still very high-touch devices, and one of the reasons that we weren't able to put it on everyone's head that came through the exhibit, but just 300 people, which was still quite a feat. So with EEG, if you just look at the raw data, even as a neuroscientist, you can't really get much out of it. So one of the first things that we needed to do was to pull out different features from the EEG data. Here are just some examples of some of the metrics that we used in the creative outputs. And we used different combinations of these in different rooms depending on what the creative direction where the creative direction took us. We chose these based on a few different parameters. So as Richard mentioned, we want things that are relevant to the concept of listening to music and what happens in our brain when we do that. So for example, interest and excitement. Interest is how much you like or dislike something. Excitement is how aroused or kind of relaxed you are. These are really key components of emotions. And so we know music can move us very emotionally, so those metrics played a key role in several of the visual outputs. We also wanted to make sure that these metrics change dynamically while people listen to music. Maybe not the same from one person to another, but definitely enough consistency and robustness that we had an interesting palette to work with creatively. There was some topography there that we could play with. And finally, we wanted to make sure that these, especially because we had only 4 months, these metrics were accessible technically, and we could put them together really fast and get things moving. So here is a lot of information, but just showing you the examples of how we mapped the metrics to the visual outputs across these different gallery spaces. And you see that we played with several different metrics, and they control different things programmatically in the visuals. And this is really, it's like paint, right? The data is a palette, and you can do many different things with it. And this was where the creative direction really mixed with the science, where we could look and say, okay, what do these metrics really mean? How do we predict they will change throughout the listening experience, and therefore how do we want to kind of output them visually in this case. So for 3 of these 4 galleries, the brain data that we used to power the visualizations was pre-recorded. A great example of this is the Aurora visualization, the Aurora gallery that was powered by brain data from 125 people. This was recorded at Dolby in their Atmos studio and taken while people listened to this really immersive Dolby Atmos mix of Great Gig in the Sky. And that's actually one of the things that really sparked the rest of the project. But because we had, a lot of time and budget to work with, we decided for one of the galleries that we would throw in some live brain data collection just to add some spice to the project. And so I'm going to dive into that a bit since it was something that was pretty unique. So for this, we had our VIP ticket holders. So because of the high-touch nature of EEG, we were not able to do this for everyone. But they were able to come in and have this kind of extra layer of personalization for the experience. So they each had timed slots. They would come into these very nicely kind of cozy listening and recording booths. They would sit down, get fitted with one of these EEGs by a real-life neuroscientist who could answer all their questions about the brain. And then they would listen to a different part of the Dark Side of the Moon album in a really immersive binaural mix. for about 10 minutes while we recorded their brain activity and their response to that music.
You can experience this in the exhibition hall across the way.
And then that data that we were collecting at the event, live, was streamed into one of the other main gallery. And each person's brain data controlled a giant cloud on the gallery wall. So when someone was more excited, their cloud got brighter. When someone was more interested or they liked what they were listening to, the cloud kind of churned in terms of its movements. And when someone was more relaxed and meditative, the cloud dispersed. And what we found is that, just anecdotally, about half the people, I would say, like, came back to the live lab and just was like, I like connected with my cloud, right? It was like, I got to relive this experience I had, I got to reflect on it in a unique way, and that was really encouraging in terms of showing us that is this opportunity for data like this to not just be something that's like conceptually interesting, but can really add a layer of experience that maybe you can't get without it. But not everyone had that, right? So going forward, how do we actually enable that for more people? Okay, we're gonna go into challenges and lessons learned, because there certainly were a lot of each of those, and I think I am passing back to you for this.
So it's kind of broken down the challenges a little bit into commercial, creative, and technical. We'll start with the commercial side of things. This was a big ticket event. You know, it was a large venue, and it's, you know, Frameless is a very commercial space. And so one of the tricky things that we have sort of from the outset was, you know, how do we price this? How do we price this for the audiences that we're trying to attract? And a big subset of that is kind of what, you know, how do we get those audiences together? Because they, you know, they weren't homogenous. There were sort of, I would say, 3 different audiences that we were targeting: the music and tech and art and creative crowd, much as, you know, a lot of you folks here. The Pink Floyd fans, because, you know, if they, you know, anyone sees Pink Floyd written in the title of a show, they'd be like, it's a Pink Floyd show, let's go. And then, you know, and then you've also got the crowd that Frameless is sort of used to, and for which they allocated hour dates, really, which were kind of the evenings on the weekends. So this is kind of the late dates, you know, that kind of scene, which is, again, it's a different kind of audience, potentially. So, you know, it was really hard to kind of, message those audiences in a sort of unified way, make them think that, you know, they've all got something to gain out of this. There's something of interest for all of them, in a slightly different but overlapping, you know, way, and then pricing it in a way that made sense, because, you know, folks that come to lates, it's kind of it's 20 quid. Okay, I'll go and do that. You know, as opposed to the world premiere of Brainstorms, which we, you know, had a ticket for, which is much more expensive. And so who does that bring along? So that was definitely a challenge for us to, you know, to figure out sort of ahead of time, for sure. Sort of along similar lines to this, there was an assumption that we made about Pink Floyd, where if we opened up the Pink Floyd floodgates, they would just come in droves. They would just be lining around the block in Marble Arch, and it would be amazing and wonderful. That did not happen. So it was very interesting. Even though we had access directly to the Pink Floyd channels, not the fan sites, but the actual, you know, main Pink Floyd channels, we were not able to kind of get that critical mass going from that audience. And so that was a sort of learning for us that we can't rely on something like that. We had to kind of make sure that we are covered, even if that sort of sure thing didn't actually turn out to be a sure thing. And then commercially as well, although we sold out of the VIP experience, the brain data capture experience, it was by far the most costly part of the show, really, because we had to have a whole team to run it for those 4 weekends. And that involved facilitators to put the headsets on the people. You know, these were all PhD neuroscientists, which was great, it was fantastic, but, you know, this all sort of comes with a cost, and then we had to make sure the logistics were working, and so the ticket holders were, you know, kind of onboarded in the right way, and so there was just a lot of cost associated with that we kind of knew that we were going to have that cost, but it was still there might have been other ways that we could do it that were not so costly. So yeah, commercially, definitely some things to think about. Yeah, creatively, I think we had a huge amount of content to produce in a very, very short time. And we also were dealing with creative approvals from the band, from Pink Floyd themselves, both in terms of the visuals in one of the galleries, but also the spatial audio mix. That was a critical thing, and also even with Imogen Heap, who we were collaborating with, we used her music. It was her music that she was sort of listening to when we recorded the brain data, and so that had to get, the way we treated that music had to get approved as well, because we had to bookend the song with some additional sort of sound design and musical elements, so that needed to sort of get approved. And then related to that, sort of those songs are a certain length, but the runtime in a place like Frameless, you go into a gallery, it's sort of a 10-minute runtime, roughly. So if you've got a 5-minute song, creatively, how do you deal with the, either end of that? So what we ended up doing with that was very much sort of building a mood in each gallery that was sort of sound design forward, not involving many musical elements, if any at all. Actually, in the Great Gig in the Sky gallery, it was kind of awesome, actually, because we were able to use some footage from Rick Wright's sailing trips and having his voice kind of coming in ghostly, like, in the ether, sort of talking about his sailing and beautiful sunsets and all that. So that was actually kind of fantastic, but it was sort of challenging to make that all work. And then as far as possible to infuse these experiences, these visuals with the data in a way that didn't feel contrived, and that really made a connection with the audience, so that if they wanted to, they could really understand what we were trying to do with the data and how it was translating. Technically, I think I've already covered, 5 galleries in 4 months is just nuts. We should have said no, but we didn't. We also had pretty limited access to computing power, and that was a significant challenge that we had to address very quickly, very early on. We also had limited content testing, so we only had 5 content tests in the whole period in the run-up to launch on site. So it was a lot of shot in the dark. It was like, is this going to work? And we just kind of had to roll with that. And a very small team. One of the ways that we addressed specifically the lack of sort of on-site access to be able to test is we virtualized. In other words, we recreated the entire venue in VR. And so we were able to then test and review, and we would have multiplayer reviewer meetings in the space, in the gallery, which we had the exact dimensions of and had created all of the visual elements and audio elements, all the spatialized audio, so that it was as near as possible to be the actual real space, so that we could, make decisions. We also had great partners. We had some really fantastic partners. We worked with AMD, who provided us, along with Supermicro, with all the compute power we needed, which was very, very substantial. We worked with Dolby. They facilitated the brain data collection. Immersive, the headsets that you just saw, provided all the headsets and hardware and support. And of course, this was something that we had to, in each case, it was a negotiation. We had to figure out what are we going to give them in return for them providing us with this hardware or support, and we had to keep on top of that and make sure that we were keeping up our end of the bargain for that. But we had amazing partners for this, and I can't recommend enough. Just don't be surprised if AMD say, "Sure, you can have 6 supercomputers. We just want to do cool stuff." I mean, that's pretty much what they said. So you never know.
Okay, so live brain data, what was difficult about that? a few things. And so first, we were pretty much pushing the edge of what this technology can do right now. And of course, the hardware and the algorithms are going to get much better, but we really were kind of on the limit of what we could do for a few reasons. So first, these devices are still very high touch, right? You can't just plop it on someone and get great data every time, right? So it takes about 5 minutes, sometimes longer, to set someone up. You're touching people's hair and moving it around, messing up their hairstyle. Sometimes saline salt water is dripping in people's faces. So a big question was, are people going to tolerate this kind of experience when they're out on a date on Friday night? Are they going to get impatient? The second one was, even if they were up for it, are we going to be able, with the team we have, under kind of high pressure, kind of time constraints, get good enough data quality to give people a good experience, right? If people have a lot of thick hair or small heads, those are actually worse, it can be really difficult to get really clean signals that aren't noisy. We could fake it, right, and say, yeah, your data's great, but the actual experience that they're going to have of their cloud, it's going to be much harder for them to connect to it, right, in a real way, because it's just going to be a bunch of random noise, right? And then, will it all work technically end to end, right? Even if we got great data, are we going to, link up all the elements of the chain to get to that visualization in the main gallery, to also send them a report? So we saved the data to the cloud. We generated reports for each VIP that got emailed to them later. Some of these steps were automated, but a lot was manual, so there was a lot of room for error. So good news is, generally, the live brain data was a success. It could have been a disaster, but we managed to pull it off. Technically, it worked, and people seemed to really enjoy the experience. Like I said, some connected to it much more than others, and we were able to get really great data for everyone except 2 out of 300 people, so I think that's pretty good. So what were the reasons for this? The first was, we had a really great team. As Rich said, it was a little expensive to do all the training and recruiting for this and have people there every night, but we brought in people that knew how to deal with EEG. It's not the simplest thing. They still underwent many hours of training to get used to these particular devices, but it meant they were able to and empowered to troubleshoot and make decisions on their own, and it allowed us to really to pull it off, I'll be honest. I think people really enjoyed talking to neuroscientists too and asking questions. They all had a neuroscience background as well as an interest in the arts as well, so they crossed that really well. We also paid a lot of attention to the experience itself of listening to the music and getting fitted to kind of give people an extra boost of patience. And for some people, that was the best part of the experience, was just stopping for 10 minutes and listening to music, having a conversation about the brain and music with someone, and that was quite unique in and of itself. And finally, we baked in a lot of extra time, right? The slots that we had were quite long. They were longer than we needed. Sometimes I got really bored and started complaining, but when we needed that extra time to troubleshoot, we used it, and it was really important. And it meant that no one was really disappointed. There was, I think, one person wanted a refund, but that was it, right? We could have squeezed through more people, but we would have had a lot more disappointment. So I'm happy that we did that. Okay, so what's next? We're going to try to go through this quickly because it would be great to have a couple of minutes for questions. So one of the things I'm really excited for is that the data that we collected in the Dolby, for the Dolby data collection for the Aurora experience, though we weren't interested in it primarily for research, we have made that data set available for academic partners like Max Planck, Goldsmiths, Newcastle University, who will be looking at it from a more basic research perspective, which is really great. We collected this data under very controlled conditions so that we could learn about it to kind of craft our experience around, but it meant that it's ripe to look at from a research perspective. So it's great to give back to the scientific community in that way.
Yeah, and in terms of where we go from here, there's just in terms of the tech and the neuroscience and that side of things. We did learn a lot from what metrics worked and what metrics were focused on the musical experience And that's something that we want to sort of improve upon, making sure that the measurements that we're getting from the brain signal are actually focused very specifically on music and the musical experience, which there are some new algorithms that we're already working on. Looking at other sensor input options that might be a little less high touch, a little more democratic, a more portable. You know, that's the idea of a shared experience where everybody is kind of hooked up to biometrics is super interesting, technically very challenging potentially, but you know, we've now done we've done an experience at scale that gives us some confidence that we can kind of you know, take some risks and try new things. And then, you know, another big part of this for me in particular on the music side is being able to do this with other bands and other artists and, you know, kind of say, well, this is your brain on, you know, Coldplay, or this is your, maybe not, yeah. Anyway, whoever it happens to be. This is, you know, just looking at those, you know, where are things similar? Where are things different? What are, you know, people's responses to one band versus another? Like, there's lots of opportunities there, I think, in the future.
When you mentioned your partnerships, you said that you had to be really conscious to make sure that you kind of delivered what you'd promised in return for what they gifted you. Could you give us some insight into some of the things that you promised in those partnerships? Yeah, for sure.
So in the case of the computers, for example, so we ended up being, you know, they were very generous to give us sort of 5 very, very powerful machines. This came from Supermicro, and in return from that, they were very interested to be able to write a white paper, sort of a case study about, you know, what they are doing in the creative space with, you know, or what people are doing in the creative space with their tech. And so we provided them with material for the case study and helped them edit it and refine it. And that got published a couple of months or a month after the show. So that's one example. You know, other examples are sort of making sure that influencer content, you know, was taken at the show and that they could share around their networks, you know, so that they can be seen to be doing interesting things. So yeah, a lot of the socials, like making sure that we're kind of sharing that around and making sure that highlighting their contribution. Yeah, I think.
And the venue?
Well, the venue, yeah, I mean, the venue was not there was a transactional aspect to that, so it was less of a sponsorship kind of situation. Was sort of, there was money involved in sort of venue hire and, you know, and that kind of thing. But I mean, for example, we shared PR together and we shared the marketing efforts, and there was, you know, we were committed to making sure that we were messaging Frameless in the right way on our socials and vice versa. You know, so there was a lot of kind of collaboration to make sure that we're supporting each other as far as possible there. Yeah. Yeah.
Could I ask? Next door. So could I ask just a little bit more about the audience journey? So in terms of getting the base level data of the audience and how diverse the data was between the audience, and then how you sort of clearly communicated how they would recognize their own cloud and how they would understand the effect of that data on it.
Yeah, so we had 3 of these listening booths running at the same time. So there were 3 clouds projected. They each were color-coded. So the lights in that booth were of a particular color, and they also got little stickers with that color. And they were given a kind of a talk through of how the metrics would change the cloud, and we also had that information printed outside of every gallery. But that was one of the challenges was, you know, how do we help people understand without bombarding them with information what data we're using, how it maps to the different parameters, how do they keep those in their mind, you know, and that's part of the creative decision making of, you know, do you keep it simple, do you know, add a lot of complexity, and so, you know, I think we learned a lot there. I mean, people don't like to read generally, but we would have a lot of people go into the galleries, experience it, and then come out and learn more about it, and then go back again and be like, oh, it was so different because I knew what the brain data was doing. But yeah, that was something we had to put a lot of thought into.
Thank you.